The nurses on Ward 4 North had quietly started calling Room 412 the bunker. It was not a cruel nickname. It was simply the most honest one they had. Because for 12 days straight, that room had been impossible to enter and impossible to reach. Not because of locked doors or broken equipment, but because of the man lying inside it. Colonel James Earl Hargrove had spent 40 years in the United States Marine Corps. He had served in 2 major conflicts, commanded thousands of men, and built a reputation so solid and so steady that his subordinates had once said he was less a person and more a geographic feature, something permanent, something that did not move unless it chose to. He had earned 6 medals, survived 4 deployments, and made decisions under pressure that most people could not have made with a week to think it over. Now he was 63 years old, lying in a hospital bed at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, dying of pancreatic cancer. And he was doing it completely on his own terms. The admitting paperwork told the clinical story plainly: advanced cancer, a recent cardiac event, rapid weight loss, and a body that was losing ground fast. But the medical team quickly learned that the paperwork was the easy part. What they had not anticipated was that Colonel Hargrove did not want to be treated. He did not want medication adjusted, dosages reviewed, or second opinions arranged. He listened to every doctor who walked through his door with the same patient, respectful attention, and then he thanked them and told them no. The first rejection came on day 1. Dr. Priya Mehta, the chief of oncology, was not a woman easily unsettled. She had spent 20 years in this field and had sat with hundreds of difficult conversations. She entered room 412 with her team, introduced herself with the calm warmth she had spent years developing, and explained 2 treatment options in careful, plain language: a palliative chemotherapy plan and an enrollment possibility in a new clinical trial. She was thorough. She was kind. She left room for questions. Hargrove looked at her when she finished. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you, doctor. I won't be needing any of that." She tried again the next day, with a different approach, softer, more personal, less clinical. He thanked her again. He declined again. His voice carried no bitterness and no fear. It carried something more difficult to argue with than either of those things. It carried certainty. The hospital's palliative care director, Dr. Franklin Osei, came on day 4. He was known throughout the building for reaching patients that others could not. He did not enter with a plan or a speech. He sat in the chair beside Hargrove's bed and simply stayed, letting the silence exist between them without rushing to fill it. 40 minutes passed. Hargrove finally looked over at him and said, quietly, "You're good at your job, son, but I already know how this ends." Osei left without an agreement. He came back once more. The result was the same. The psychiatry team sent a consultant. The hospital chaplain came twice. A social worker arranged a meeting. Each person who entered room 412 left with the same outcome: a polite, firm, unbreakable no from a man who had clearly thought about this deeply and was not confused, not afraid, and not asking for help making up his mind. By day 8, the hospital's ethics committee had been formally convened. Their conclusion was careful and honest. Colonel James Hargrove was mentally competent, fully aware of what he was refusing, and within his legal rights to refuse it. There was nothing the staff could do against his will. The committee filed their paperwork and quietly closed the matter. By day 12, something heavy had settled over Ward 4 North. The nurses and doctors who passed room 412 each day were not angry. They were not defeated exactly, but they carried the particular sadness of people who have every tool available and have been told, gently and without cruelty, that the tools are not welcome here. 20 doctors had tried. 20 had walked out of that room with the same answer. What none of them knew, what no one on that floor could have predicted, was that the person who would finally reach Colonel Hargrove would not be a physician at all. Delina Okafor had not planned to become a nurse. She had planned to re-enlist. She had served the United States Marine Corps for 8 years, working as a radio communications operator assigned to a regimental combat team. She was exceptionally good at her job. Her call sign was Ghostwire, a name she had earned not for being invisible, but for doing what most operators could not: maintaining a clear signal in conditions that should have made communication impossible. Bad terrain, electronic jamming, broken equipment, hostile fire. Whatever got in the way, Delina found the frequency and held it. A roadside explosive device outside of Sangin, Afghanistan, in 2011, changed everything. She survived, but the injury to her spine and the partial hearing loss in her left ear meant that the physical requirements of active service were no longer something her body could meet. She spent 18 months in rehabilitation, furious and quiet in equal measure. Then 2 more years doing very little, not from laziness, but from the particular kind of lost feeling that comes when you have given everything to something, and it is suddenly, permanently over. A veteran trauma nurse at Bethesda eventually said something to her that changed her direction. "You already know what these patients are carrying," the woman told her. "That's not a thing you can teach in a classroom." Delina thought about it for a long time. Then, reluctantly and slowly, the way she approached most things she later came to love, she enrolled in nursing school on the GI Bill. She graduated and returned to Walter Reed 7 years later as a night shift registered nurse on Ward 4 North. She was 34 years old. She was quiet in the way that combat teaches people to be quiet, not withdrawn, but economical, aware, alert to things that other people walk past without noticing. She had a gift for sitting with patients in the hardest part of the night, without needing to explain herself or fill the room with words. She had heard about room 412 before she ever set foot inside it. Everyone on the ward had. She did not walk in with a plan. She did not think of herself as the person who would succeed where 20 others had not. She was simply doing her job. It was nearly 2:17 in the morning when she entered room 412 for the 3rd time that night. She had noticed earlier in her shift that Hargrove's vitals had shown a small but concerning change, and she preferred to check on things herself rather than rely entirely on the numbers from a distance. She did not turn on the overhead light. She had learned early in her time on the ward that bright fluorescent light at 2 in the morning felt like an intrusion, and she had made a habit of working by the soft glow of the monitoring equipment instead. Hargrove was awake. He almost always was at this hour. He turned his head toward her, not with suspicion, not with the measured blankness he had used on the doctors, but with something quieter. He had noticed her before. She did not speak at him. She checked what needed to be checked, adjusted a monitoring lead that had been slipping out of place, and kept her movements calm and unhurried. And then, in a moment she could not fully explain afterward, she leaned slightly toward him. She said 2 words, very quietly, in the dark. Iron 6. The room changed. Hargrove's eyes, which had been tracking her with the mild and impersonal attention he gave all the staff, locked onto her face, with a focus that was startling in its sudden intensity. He did not speak for a long moment. The monitors continued their soft beeping. Somewhere far down the hall, a door clicked shut. Then, in a voice that had lost all its careful composure and dropped into something entirely unguarded, he said, "How do you know that?" She told him. Not all at once, not in a prepared and organized way. She told him the way radio operators communicate, directly, without wasted words, paying close attention to what the other person was actually hearing. She told him that she had served with the 1st Marines, that she had been a communications operator in Fallujah in 2004, temporarily attached to a command element, that she had spent 4 days on a rooftop with a damaged radio, relaying position coordinates under heavy fire, and that the commanding officer of that element had been identified on the network by the call sign Iron 6. She had never seen his face. She had only known his voice, steady, unhurried, clear even in the worst moments. She told him that about a year ago, the hospital had distributed an audio recording of a memorial address he had given for veterans. She had recognized the voice before the name appeared on the screen. She had looked him up the way a person looks up someone who once mattered to them without their knowledge. She had found the article about his diagnosis, the one published by a veterans advocacy journalist who had somehow gotten him to agree to be written about. And then she had moved on, the way life requires. She did not tell him that she had cried a little when she read that article. She understood now why she had. Hargrove was silent for a long time when she finished. He looked up at the ceiling. She waited. "You held that line," he said at last. 4 days. We didn't know who was on the other end. Just a voice coming through. "Ghost wire," she said. He stayed quiet. She watched something in his face change. Not collapse, not break, but open. Like a door being unlocked from the inside. "I have been here for 12 days, he said slowly, and not one person in this building has seen me. They see the chart. They see the rank. They see a problem they want to solve." He paused. "You're the first person to walk in here and know who I actually am." She did not argue with him. She also did not simply agree. "I see you, Colonel," she said. "And what I see is a man who knows how to hold a position long after most people would have moved. That was the right call in Fallujah." She let a moment pass. "It is not the right call here." He looked at her. It was the first time in 12 days that he had looked at anyone in that room without the expression of a man who had already made up his mind. He did not agree to treatment that night. It would not be honest to say that 2 words and 1 conversation undid 12 days of absolute certainty. Real change does not arrive that cleanly in real life. What happened was more like the very first movement of something that had been completely still. Before she left the room, he asked her to come back. Not as the nurse managing his care. She already was that. But to talk. She said she would. She did. Over the next 4 nights they talked. She was not a therapist. She did not pretend to have answers that she did not have. She was a woman who had also been young in a place where everything was dangerous, who had also come home carrying something that did not have a simple name, who had also spent years being quietly furious at her own body for the ways it had changed without her permission. She talked about Sangin. He talked about Fallujah. She talked about the long, angry years between her injury and her nursing degree, and about eventually learning, slowly, and not without resistance, that accepting help was not the same as surrendering. It was, she said, more like a position change, a tactical adjustment, finding better ground. He listened to that in a way he had not listened to any doctor. On the 5th night, he asked her to contact Dr. Mehta and tell her he would like to speak with her. Mehta arrived at 7 in the morning, with the composed expression of someone who had been told not to expect anything, and had therefore quietly prepared herself for everything. She found Hargrove sitting upright in bed. He asked her to go through the treatment options again from the beginning. She did. He asked questions, sharp, specific, precise questions that told her he had been thinking carefully about this for days. She answered each one honestly, including the parts where the honest answer was uncertain. When she finished, he said, "I'm not doing this because I believe I'm going to beat this. I know what the numbers say." He looked toward the window. "I have a daughter in Portland. She doesn't know I'm here. I was not a good enough father when it counted, and I would like a little more time to try to be better at it." He paused. "That seems like a reason worth having." Mehta said that she agreed. He began treatment 4 days later. That same evening, he called his daughter, Renee. The call lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. The nurse on the overnight shift noted in the care chart that he had been heard laughing once. Quietly, briefly, somewhere around the 90-minute mark. Renee flew in from Portland the following week. She was 31, careful, and had spent most of her life learning not to need too much from a father who was often somewhere far away. She sat with him for 3 days. By the time she left, something between them had changed. Not fixed, not fully healed, but no longer closed off. A door had been opened. It would take time to walk through it. They had agreed to try. Hargrove lived another 7 months. They were not easy months. The treatment was difficult. The illness continued its slow and determined course, and there were nights when he admitted to Delina during her rounds that he was not entirely sure he had made the right call. She always listened to that without rushing to talk him out of it. And then, usually within a few quiet minutes, he would answer his own doubt before she needed to say a word. He passed away on a Thursday in May, with Renee beside him, and a photograph of his old battalion on the windowsill, brought up from Pensacola by his former sergeant major, who had driven through the night to deliver it in person. In his final clear week, Hargrove had made one request. Not about his service record, not about his medals or his legacy, or the formal language of his obituary. He asked only that someone write down what had happened in room 412. A quiet nurse, he had said, knew the right frequency. Delina Okafor returned to her shift on the following Monday. She did not speak about what had happened publicly, not for a long time. The story eventually came out through Renee, who wrote about it 2 years later in a piece about veterans and medical care, and through a single commencement address that Delina agreed to give at a nursing school graduation, where she spoke about it once, briefly, directly, without decoration. She said that in 12 years of nursing, she had never healed anyone with a medication she did not prescribe. What she had, she said, was something she had learned long before nursing school, in a place far from any hospital. She had learned to find the signal when everything around it was noise. She had learned to hold the line when the connection was uncertain. And she had learned to stay on frequency long enough for the person on the other end to realize that someone was still there. That, she told the graduates, was not a clinical skill. It was a human one. And it was the most important thing she brought into any room.